are live. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Brandy Interpreter's first live Q&A. I'm extremely excited to be here today with you all. Extremely excited that you're here, and extremely excited to continue the conversation with a very popular guest that we had on the show not too long ago. But before we get into that, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank today's live Q&A sponsor, which is the Orange County Department of Education's Translators and Interpreters Conference. This conference, as you know, perhaps you know, just took place over the weekend, last weekend, September the 22nd through the 24th. And it was such a great event. I had the opportunity to have a booth there and meet a lot of you listeners and raffle off some of the Brandy Interpreter, first generation of Brandy Interpreter notebooks, which was just a great event, guys. So if you have the opportunity, they will be having next year their 7th annual Interpreters and Translators Conference on September the 29th and the 30th. So make sure that you stay tuned to that. You can contact Natalia Abarca, and she is someone that, the person, actually the organizer of the event, that puts together the conference, and it's specifically designed for interpreters and translators in education. So there's content that is very specific to those that are practicing in K through 12 public education. So make sure that you go check out the Interpreters and Translators Conference. Stay tuned, get on their email list, whatever you need to do so that you are able to be a part of that conversation. It is the Interpreters and Translators Conference that will be taking place September 29th and the 30th next year, which sounds like, oh my gosh, that's so far away, but you know how things go. It just, you know, it flies by, it goes by quickly. So thanks to us, our sponsors. Now I'd like to really be able to invite back our previous guest. And I was just telling her prior to hitting live, you know, you're one of my most downloaded, not just audio podcasts, but watched video podcast on the YouTube channel as well. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome back Judy Jenner to the Brandy Interpreter podcast show. And today it's going to be a very special one because it's going to be a live Q&A just for Judy, the questions that were submitted just for Judy. And she is just ever so kind to be coming back, volunteering her time, and being able to answer these questions. So I'd like to welcome Judy Jenner back to the show and bring her back on stage so that she and I can continue this conversation. Judy, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mireya. It's lovely to be here, and I'm just very flattered to hear that my episode was popular and that I'm the first one for the Q&A. So hopefully I have some good answers to your questions. I don't have all the answers, but I think I'll probably have a few.
I think you struck a chord or something, because there's definitely, you know, there was much in there. So a lot of people definitely, I'm sure, took plenty of notes and are ready to take some notes for today. So how about we get started?
Let's do it. I'm ready.
Let's do it. The very first question came in from one of our listeners. Her name is Victoria Igena Cesar, and I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, Victoria. If not, you already know I'm infamous for butchering last names, first names too. So, and Victoria wants to know, how do you network to get interpreting jobs? That's a great question, Victoria. By the way, thank you so much for having taken the time to submit that. So, Judy, let's get started. How do we do this?
It's a big question. We could be here all night, so I'm going to limit my comments to a few minutes. And the main question, the main answer is it depends what kind of interpreting jobs you're trying to get, right? Are you trying to get into the over-the-phone interpreting business? Are you trying to get court interpreting work? Are you trying to get conference work? So, you know, every strategy is a little bit different, but maybe I'll stick to, I think you're probably asking about court because that's the question I get the most.
Yeah.
And for court, let's go beyond the courts, because to get work from the courts, you get to the court, you're certified, and you say, here's my information, they'll call you, right? It's just may not be at the rate that you would like, right? Because they set the rates and they're just not very attractive for a lot of folks like me who work also a lot in the private sector. So if you want some private sector work, you gotta hang out where the clients hang out, which means attorneys. and court reporting firms, and some interpreting agencies, which I don't work with as much. But you have to market to them and go to their events and get your name out. And I know that's not super fun and sounds kind of tedious, and it is. And a lot of it will be word of mouth. And yeah, I when I first started as a certified court interpreter in Nevada, I did all the jobs that nobody else wanted. The court was sending me to all the unattractive jobs, and I was well aware that they were sending me to, child protective services, witness interviews, to people's dirty couches, and I would go to everything. But when you go to these things, you also meet a lot of attorneys, and you give them your card, as you should, and eventually you move on to bigger and better jobs.
Yeah, once your name gets out there and they're starting to mention who you are, and of course that they like your work, right? I mean, I'm sure that that has a lot to do with it. You begin to build reputation. When
Yes.
you say hanging out where they hang out, should I be stalking them, going to eat where they're eating?
You
What are you
can.
suggesting here? What are we doing exactly?
Yeah, you can, but of course, there are some well-known bars and restaurants where all the lawyers have lunch and happy hour, which isn't too hard. Those aren't too hard to find out if you live in a relatively small town. But the easier ways to go to some of their events. There's the bar association in every county and every state usually, and they have events for attorneys, right? They're not geared towards translators and interpreters; they're geared towards attorneys. But if you want attorneys as your clients, you can show up to some of those events. And I do quite a bit. I go to some other professional development events, which, yeah, are oftentimes way over my head. But sometimes I'll just ask an intelligent question, and then somebody will come up to me and say, "Oh, who are you? I don't recognize you." And I say, "Well, I'm a legal interpreter, and I'm usually the only one there, so it's not that hard to stand out." So that's kind of what I mean. I think you need to do the internal, like inside our industry, networking, going to TNI events, meeting your colleagues, and oftentimes your colleagues will recommend you. But I think the other part is going outside of that, and finding where the actual clients are, because oftentimes your colleagues will be your clients, but the clients will also come from the other side, which is, the client side. So
Yeah.
put yourself out there.
No, I like that. That's actually something that I had mentioned to someone else that was interested. This was way back in the beginning, in trying to figure out how to break into the public education sector, right? And they had an agency and trying to break into that. And my suggestion was exactly that. What you just mentioned is, well, instead of trying to start at the top with the decision makers, why don't you go into what other companies would call maybe like the brand ambassadors, and the people that are part of the company and that have a lot to say potentially, like in your case, if you're wanting to do special education, are you hanging out where the speech pathologists are hanging out, like in their
Mhm.
conferences? So it's
Exactly.
the similar idea that you're talking about with court interpreting, is hanging out. I mean, go to the bars, sure, but I mean
Not for
that could be
everybody. I
that could be
personally
a
like
little
going
too
to
much,
bars.
and then you'll forget why you're there.
That could possibly happen, but you never know where your next client is going to be, and it's good to be ready, and to be ready to network. I mean, my sister met one of our translation clients at a yoga class. Mm.
Really?
Yeah, it
And
really
so
is
having
amazing.
that elevator speech is
Uh-huh.
important, right? Like,
Totally.
that's
Yeah.
something we didn't talk about. Yeah, like and let's actually, let's just kind of impromptu question, like what should be included in this elevator speech? How many seconds do they say it should be? More
There's
than 10? Does it change?
I went to business school, and I'm just not a huge fan of that business speak and like these mantras. It has to be this, it has to be that. I think you have to tailor it to the situation. I mean, of
It
course you
feels
should be.
natural.
I think you should be brave, right? That the problem is, a lot of people, when they're nervous, they have a tendency to talk too much and give people too much detail. I don't think I haven't noticed you doing it, but a lot of us do it. So just keep it brave, I mean, nobody wants to have that much detail. Even happens to me when people introduce themselves to me, which I'm always so happy at conference. Sometimes they give me so much detail about them that I just can't retain it, because it's so much. And I think the same is
Mm,
true for everybody you're talking to. And I think my approach, instead of talking about myself, is asking people what they need, and what they need. Like, what are your business needs? Hey, what business are you in, right? And then,
yeah,
of course,
making it
people.
about them.
Yeah, and then in the US we're so polite that ultimately, of course, the other person will ask you, "Oh, well, what do you do?" And maybe it's a match, maybe it's not. If it's not a match, if they're you already know, they already told you there, or maybe they're a realtor and don't work with have no need for translation, then you can say, "Well, I help businesses bridge the language gap, and we do it through translation and interpreting, and I can tell you more if you're interested. If I've bored you, I'll have a nice evening," right? So I just try to make it fun and interesting, and sometimes have some
Yeah.
icebreaker questions like, what's the did you I'll tell you something that makes you smarter than 99% of the population, which is I'll tell you the difference between interpreting and translation. And oftentimes people are like, that sounds cool, and I think it's kind of a good line. I mean, not everybody likes it, but I've that's been kind of fun. I'm just a big believer in following your gut and keeping it brief, and not being too salesy and too pushy, right? If you can tell the
Yeah.
other person really their eyes are glossing over, they're not interested, instead of staying there and feeling like you have to continue the conversation, I think something I've perfected is just saying, "Oh, nice talking to you. I'll move on. I'm
And
gonna
move
go
on.
mingle and just move on." There's no shame in that, just move on.
Yeah, I and you hit an excellent point, which is about it being natural and not
Mm-hmm.
not sounding so salesy. Because yeah, I think that's I mean, and not everyone's going to be interested. Absolutely, I
Mm-hmm.
totally agree. But the point here being, just being top of mind, or at least having that lasting impression as you had that conversation, and something like that might have been, what I heard actually. I had a young woman come to me and say that, did you know there was a difference between interpreter and translator? That's a good one. We're always
Exactly. You
complaining
never
about.
know.
Let's go on over to our next question, Judy, which is about boundaries. So this was something that, when we shared your highlights and your highlight clips, where we talked about the big two-letter word that it sounds like scary, right? Which is saying no,
Hmm.
and how to be able to set these boundaries. And I'm always thinking about the new language professionals that are coming in, and just trying to navigate the industry and the business, right, and their own business themselves, and really determining whether this is something that they want to be doing on their own, or working for others. Either way, this next question fits whether you're an employee or self-employed. So for new language professionals, Judy, what would you recommend when it comes to creating healthy work boundaries? What are those recommendations now in your years working, on your own? What do you see as a healthy boundary for you?
It's a tough one because boundaries are different for everybody. Everybody has a different amount of work that they want, that they can absorb and still feel good about their life, and their sort of work life balance. Um, but I think the easiest thing you can do is to bill your time at such a good rate, or at a rate that you should think about, that allows you not to work crazy hours. Right. So it's a boundary that you're setting not with yourself, but you're setting it with your clients. You're saying my time is worth X, and it should be, I think it should be in the triple digits. I'm not telling you what to bill, but I think it should be in the triple digits. And then you build that, right, and at that rate you don't have to, or fee schedule, whatever you call it, you don't have to do that many hours, right? The lower your fee schedule, the more you have to work to feel that you're hitting whatever target you want, if you have such a thing, right? And a lot of us burn out because the translation side, a lot of new folks take this work at very low rates because they get work, and then it becomes this vicious circle that you're working all the time, and now you're miserable and you wish you had more time for yourself, for your spouse, your boyfriend, girlfriend, children, pets, whatever it would be, right? And that's not why you got into this business. You got into it to be happy and to have a good balance. So I'm not always the best at saying no to other things that are not my professional life, but for I say no to clients all the time, and I'm actually quite good at it. And yeah, I mean, I only if the whatever the client wants me to do isn't something that sounds attractive to me, and it isn't. Forget the fee schedule. On the fee schedule, everybody I think knows what it is, and that. But then if it's like too tight, or it has to be tomorrow, I have to drop everything right now. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I got one this morning where actually I had a cancellation, so I was already getting paid for a full day today, which is nice. And then somebody said, "Do you want to do a full day Zoom depot right now?" And I was in my workout outfit, and Even, and I could have done it, but I honestly just really didn't feel like it.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that sounds terrible, but I'm already getting paid full day, and I don't. If I could double book it, usually sure I'm all for it. But I just didn't want to do it because my twin sister and business partner is visiting, so we had more fun things planned, and I said no. So yeah, saying no and finding out what's important to you, right? Do you love working 10 hours a day? Then don't let anybody tell you that's not for you, right?
Yes.
If you can maintain that in the long run, I don't personally know anybody who can in the very long run, but it just needs to work for you, right? And it changes with time too a little bit. I'm getting much better on my weekends, right? I
Mm,
really try to not do that much work on the weekends, and if it's something that needs to be done with a rush for translation, I only really do it for my favorite clients, and I don't really even care how much they pay me. I mean, I don't. Sometimes there just isn't a number that's worth it anymore. In the beginning, you're very hungry, and I'm still hungry. I still want to run this business and be successful, but it also shifts a little bit, right? At some point, you say, you know what, I value my my weekend with husband more than I value this particular project, and that's
for sure.
okay. You can't do it
Exactly.
all. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what I really like about that is that you're also saying, or at least what I'm capturing is making sure that you're starting off in something that yes, that is feasible, that is sustainable. Because what happens if you overextend yourself, and this is how you get this customer accustomed to, right? Like these overextension, perhaps of the work that you do, or the fact that yes, I'll work 24/7, for this project for you. And then the day that you decide this is no longer sustainable and you say no, that's the only reason that they work with you, perhaps, right? Is because like, oh,
Yeah.
like she'll work through the night, right? And then when you
Exactly.
decide I don't want to work through the night anymore, like, my
Precisely.
bags under my eyes are getting way too
Yeah, I
big.
need too much makeup to make it look good. Yeah, and I think you have to set the expectation with the client too, right? Yeah, I'm not a big fan of this belief that just because we work for ourselves, we're happy to work all night and all day and all weekend. I mean, that's just we can, but the client's gonna have to compensate us for this and very well. So I'm a big fan of surcharges, weekend surcharges, all kinds of surcharges.
Oof,
Every
oof.
business does it, you know. I mean, I think in our industry we're pretty much quite afraid of billing those surcharges. I'm never quite sure what we're afraid of, but probably we're afraid that the client will say no. But
Oh,
if you
for
don't,
sure.
but if you
Yeah.
don't really want the business anyway, if they say no, then it's not you're no worse off. And if I have to work, I've done a few depositions on Saturday for very special clients, and I bill them double, and they're like, sure. I mean, but if I told them it'll cost only the regular rate, they'll be happy too, right? But you gotta try something. You just have to try different pricing strategies and figure out what the value is to you of your time.
Yeah, and if that's something you establish with your client, they already know it's not a surprise, right? It's that Judy's gonna charge us, like double for working on Saturday. So yes, 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 make sure you approve that ahead of time because
Exactly.
we need this, we need her.
Right, and I think every business charges has different fee structures for weekend service work, right? I mean, even the U.S. government has figured that out, and they're not exactly leaders in pricing strategy. But if you want your passport done over the weekend, it's going to cost you a little bit more, like a lot more than if you want it in the regular 2 or 3 weeks that it takes to print the passport.
Yeah,
So even if the federal government has figured out how to price this, I think we can
that's so
we can
true.
do it.
Expedite means more expensive, people. So
Yeah, and I think everybody gets that, but for some reason we as the little people that we oftentimes perceive us to be, and I want us to get away from that because we're so critical to the economy and to all kinds of businesses in this country and over the world. We should have some I guess some pride in what we contribute and bill it accordingly.
and bill it accordingly. Yes, price it out accordingly. I know that's something that stuck with me the last time you and I spoke was with regards to the pricing, and I took that to heart. As many of you know, I am a new business owner myself, and I'm super excited, and so I've all this information, I take in as well from experienced professionals such as yourself and business owners. So the pricing piece, for sure, definitely. I'm not trying to go hungry here.
Yeah, you'll
So
do great. You'll do, congratulations.
thank you. Thank you so much, Judy. I'd like to ask another question, which is, as a collective, female collective, how could we add more value to the work that we do? In other words, how can we raise the standards of our profession? You and I spoke about this topic briefly in our podcast episode, with regards to this being a female dominant industry, the language industry, and we're always striving to really raise that standard and elevate that standard of the profession. And what would you recommend to be those things that we can do, even though if they're subtle, but as a collective we do them together, help raise the standard of what we do?
Great question. Of course, the female part of our industry, that's one of my favorite topics. And, I think there's a lot of correlation between fee structures and female. I think we're just not as good at negotiating, by the way. And I don't mean this in a mean way, but I think that's a reality.
Yeah.
Well, to stand out as an interpreter, especially, I think it's unfortunately still relatively easy to stand out, and that this is, I think, a sort of a sad state of affairs. But I hear this from clients all the time. You have to be early and professionally dressed and have your stuff together. It's not that difficult, but unfortunately, the fact that clients comment on this all the time
Mhm.
certainly means that others don't do this, which I
Yeah.
find obviously very concerning. To me, that's the minimum standard, that you're early, that you're well dressed, and that you've got your stuff together.
Basic.
It's
Yeah.
basic, but the reality is, for whatever reason, and I'm not picking on anybody in particular, but I don't think we're, as a profession, it doesn't seem to me, at least from what my clients tell me, that we're meeting that standard. So to elevate the profession, oftentimes when I first started as a court interpreter, I thought, well, this is kind of easy to stand out. I'm always 25 minutes early, and then
I got this.
I got this. It's not that hard, right? But of course, doing a good job is key. But what does it really mean to do a good job? A lot of our clients can't evaluate the quality of the work because they don't speak the language. So they evaluate you on factors that have nothing to do with your actual interpreting skills. And that's the way you present yourself, the way you communicate via email, the way you answer the telephone, and
Mm.
yes, the way you dress. And maybe it's unfair, but that's all they have to judge you on. And if you think about it, it's what I judge my CPA on. I judge her by her website. I judge her by her reputation. I don't have the
True.
foggiest idea if she does a good job on my tax return. I mean, I don't know because I don't have the skills. And honestly, I don't want to learn. I just go by these outside factors. And the same is true for interpreting. Yeah, just show up and be prepared. And oftentimes, clients will say to me, "Well, you're the first interpreter who's asked for preparation materials." And I'm like, I just refuse to believe that, because I know I have so many great colleagues and they also ask for preparation materials. When they say, oh, we're going into a $50 million litigation, I say, okay, I'd like some discovery documents, and here's a list of what I need so I can prepare. And I know that I'm not the only interpreter, but oftentimes clients have had only exposure to interpreters who maybe don't do that. And right. And then when you do that, you look like a superstar. Although, of course, if you're going into this huge deposition, you need some materials, and I'm actually going into one tomorrow, and I'll show you, I've got a huge folder here of things I had to print out, and it's
Wow.
all organized and ready to go with terminologies. And I know something about the subject, but not as much as I would have liked. So just be
Yeah.
prepared.
And preparation. I was just having a conversation actually with well, actually, I'm not going to say who, but the episode comes out tomorrow, and that's exactly what she said, and how she was able to differentiate herself from the rest of the team. It ended up being a team interpreting deal, and she was able to differentiate herself and get returning business because she took it so seriously that she said, I'm going to prepare for this. It was a completely new topic for her, and perhaps she went overboard, she says, in terms of how others saw that she was preparing for it, but it definitely helped to differentiate her, and people
Mm-hmm.
wanted to work with her for future assignments. So it makes a
Mm-hmm.
difference. And we are visual creatures. It's they tell us don't judge a book by its cover, but really that's really what we're doing. The first thing we do is visually, right? Like, what are we seeing? And am I seeing professionalism? What am I
Right.
seeing? What I want to see? So, and depending on who you're working with, if they want to work with a professional, I think they're looking visually for professionalism. So
Yeah, and
great.
speaking of professionalism, it's always like kind of uncomfortable to bring it up, the topic of professional dress, and unfortunately, or for better or for worse, it's something that happens more with women, right? With men, you put on. I've seen men who could be better dressed, but I think oftentimes as females, we're in a very difficult position, right? We want to be professional, but we also want to feel like I'm a woman. Why I don't want to have to wear a potato sack to be expected, right? But I think it's such a fine line, and I think I can talk about it because I'm also a woman. But it, it, we I think we should err on the side of conservative, which I'll just say that I have seen some colleagues who don't do that, and you have to know your audience. You're going into a law firm, you're not going into a marketing company or a nightclub. And I've interpreted for the some association of nightclubs and food and beverage. You can wear something different there, right? But
Yeah.
if you're going into court, you expect to dress conservatively. I mean, and I know people have different sort of definitions of what that means, but my definition is you wear a suit,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
everything else is. I don't think you can never go wrong with a suit, right? But it's a I think it's a touchy subject. We don't want to make women feel like they can't express sort of their femininity, but you have to be careful. You're going into a very conservative environment, and
Exactly.
whether
Yeah.
that's just what you've self-selected into. So you have to respect the dress code of that profession, which is the legal profession. And I mean, maybe the form-fitting, really cute short dresses, those are awesome. I love them too, but I think you should save them for a different setting.
Yeah, and I'd like the attention to be elsewhere, if that's the case. I know for a fact that when I was young and the court interpreter walked in into our event, well, not event, it was the hearing. I just remember thinking like, wow, I that's someone I'd like to resemble, at least,
Mhm.
in dress code. And then when she introduced herself as the interpreter to, we were sitting right watching the other cases. I was like, and she's an interpreter. This is so great. So yeah, I mean, it was just all appearance. I mean, it wasn't even output yet.
Yep.
Judy, let's. I'm gonna do one of those, quick questions that, and I'm gonna forget the word again, but
Rapid fire. Are they called rapid fire questions? Yeah.
thank you. Rapid fire question: website or no website?
Yes. I can't believe I still get this question. I'm sorry. I don't know. I mean, we're all on the internet right now, right? I don't understand why. I don't see one single argument for not having a website. I don't see it. That's like not
Especially
having a telephone.
especially with the now with the easiness of being able to create one, right? I can see before, I think in the past, not that I ever tried, but I've heard stories of what it was
Sure.
like to actually try to create one, or even hire someone. And now
It
you've
used to
got,
be harder, yeah, but now there's
yeah.
no excuses. Like with Wix and stuff, you can. I mean, my 10-year-old friend can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, go on there. There's definitely a lot of help right now. We've got a couple minutes left, Judy, so I just want to take the opportunity to ask one very last question, and this one always has to do with the people that are just joining the profession, or those language professionals that are aspiring to begin or are beginning. What are those recommendations that you would give the young language professionals that are wishing to enter the court interpreting field specifically? What are those things that you would say absolutely, in addition to considering everything else you've already graciously shared with us, what recommendations would you give that group of individuals?
First of all, ask yourself some hard questions before you get into legal and court interpreting. The main one being, do you like lawyers? I ask this question of my students all the time who are taking legal interpreting classes from me, and I say, ask yourself the question. I'm not joking. Some people haven't even thought about it. Some people say, you know what, I really don't like lawyers. I think they're all jerks. And I'm like, I get it. I'm married to one. He's not a jerk, but I know plenty of jerk lawyers, but I also know a lot. Most lawyers are great, right? But just like in every profession, there's sort of a breakdown. And if you think you're not going to be surrounded by lawyers, you're wrong. And I think some folks want to get into court interpreting because it is probably the most regimented, the most structured, the most you know, it's relatively well paid compared to other areas of interpreting. But they don't really ask themselves the question, what will I be doing? And also ask yourself the question, can you understand the fact that you will not be an advocate? Can you live with the fact that you will be an interpreter and that you will be telling
Mhm.
people, sorry, I cannot talk, sorry, I cannot answer that question, sorry, I am not allowed to do this? And I think, especially as women in an industry where we're helping people with through language, it's
Mhm.
really hard to draw that boundary. And I've had some students who said, I need to advocate. I say, you cannot advocate. You can advocate, but you won't be a court interpreter. You can be a lot of other things. You can be a consumer advocate. You can be a social worker, but you can't be a court interpreter because that's not your role. So I think that's something we don't talk about enough before people become court interpreters. And it's tough, even for me after all these years. I was just at this trial, and the juror comes over and he says, "Hey, I just want to do." I said, "We're sorry, we're not allowed to talk to you." And he said, I just want to, I said, sorry. And
Yeah.
I said, Madam Clerk, just went on the record that, the jurors, they're like, yeah, you have to go back. And it's uncomfortable, right? He wanted to ask about interpreting, and I would have loved to tell him, but I can't. Those are the rules, and there's no ambiguity about the rules, right? That's the beauty
Mhm.
of court interpreting, that it's very clear uh, what's allowed and what's not.
And
And that, yeah, that's maybe two big questions you'd be asking yourself. And then also, what's your ability, or depending on where you live, do you just want to work for the, sorry, dogs, do you just want to work for the courts, or do you want to try to get business outside the courts, which of course is harder, but it's much better paid. It just involves a lot more work, right? So I think you have to really analyze the market that you live. If you live in a market where there just isn't that much legal work, this credential will be good. And of course, now with Zoom interpreting, you have the ability to work all over the world.
Mhm.
But ask yourself, how many interpreters are in your area? Is there enough work? Do a little bit of an analysis. And I know a lot of us get into the profession because we love language and we don't do that much analysis. So I'm always a big advocate of saying, okay, let's do some analysis before I spend thousands of dollars in this really cool workshop, because I love Holly Mickelson, who I love too, the grand dame of interpreting, right? But
Right.
ask yourself, what am I going to do now? I've got this great course, or I went to the University of Arizona and spent 3 weeks there, but do I have the ability to make a living with this? And does my market allow for it? For example, in
Uh,
Nevada, we have a huge shortage of court interpreters. So Nevada is a good place. I don't know that much about the market, for example, in California. Obviously, it's a big market, but there's also a lot of interpreters, and
interpreters.
especially in Southern California. So
Yes, absolutely.
we
I
could be
like
here
that.
all day.
Yeah, go to Nevada for.
Yeah, come to Nevada. We need. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's not California. Nobody wants. I don't think there's a lot of people who say, "Yeah, I want to move from California to Nevada," and I get it. But there are a lot of opportunities here. I think, especially on the court side.
That there you go. That's really good to know. Actually, I like the analysis part in communications. They call it environmental scanning.
Ooh.
When we're, yeah, when we're trying to scan an audience, scan, the public and what's happening out there, what's to come. So that's an excellent point, is doing an analysis and or an environmental scanning of your surroundings.
Mm-hmm.
Judy, as always, it has been an absolute pleasure. I
Same
really,
here.
really, truly appreciate your time, and your willingness to come again on this platform and answering those lingering questions that some people submitted and were left behind after listening to your show. I know I'm always willing and ready to have conversations with you, because you're just so full of knowledge and experience, and just the fact that you're willing to share that with us is just, again, I tell you again, you're an amazing individual, and I
Aw.
appreciate you so much. So
Oh,
thank
you're
you for the
welcome.
opportunity.
It's my pleasure. I think that we need to help each other out. We strengthen each other. Of course, we're all busy, but nothing makes me happier than helping folks who are maybe getting started, young, especially female professionals. And I mean, I wish that podcasts like yours had been around when I started more than 20 years ago, but we really had no idea what we were doing. So this is a powerful thing. This is a powerful peer-to-peer sort of inside of our industry, and we're strengthening each other. And that's one of my big goals, to leave this profession better than I found it, and what I can do to contribute to it, within reason. Okay, podcasts here and there. It's my pleasure, and the time always flies with you. And I always wish we had more time. But speaking about networking, a dear colleague and friend just rang the doorbell, which is why the dogs are barking. So I think it's time for me to become the hostess and make some tasty Aperol spritzes.
Yes, talk about boundary setting. Well, thank you so much, Judy. I appreciate you, and we'll be in touch soon.
Sounds good. Thank you so
Take care.
much.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Well, it looks like I'm losing light here because, of course, we're sun is setting and it's almost time to go. Everything is darkening, so my lighting isn't the best once it starts to get a little darker. But I want to take the opportunity to thank you, the audience, for being here, for just joining us live and watching, or even if you're not here live, if you're returning and watching this episode. This conversation is always great. I'm always excited to just be able to have conversations. And I think what I'm going to be doing is, streaming live Q&As with returning guests more often. So I just want to make sure that that next month in October, we will be having another live Q&A. I'll be having on October 27th, we'll be having Cindy Rote back for a live Q&A. So if you've not already signed up to the email list, head on over to the website, www.brandtheinterpreter.com. Sign up at the top of the email list. At the top of the website, you will see that there is a little button that says join the email list. So if you can do that, sign up. That way you're getting the notifications of the live Q&A that are going to be coming up in October, in November, potentially December, and then again in January. These are all going to be returning guests. That way you can submit your questions. Jose Alfredo Elias, I see you. Thank you so much for having joined the live, our first live Q&A. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope the information was relevant and useful to you, and I hope to see you guys next month here for Cindy Rote's live Q&A. Thank you so very much for joining today. Take care and have a great night. Good night.